This is Corinne.
And this is Ayani.
And you're listening to Sex, Love, Literature, a pop culture podcast where we take a semi-scholarly look at why
and how
the sex stuff in media matters.
Back in your ear holes for the first time since May, we're fresh off our summer hiatus. This episode, we're joined by friends of the show and fellow pop culture connoisseurs, Mav and Hannah from VoxPopcast.
In part inspired by Netflix's recent Persuasion adaptation, as well as the continued success of Bridgerton, we wanted to put Regency romances in context. In the first of 2 episodes, we get into what exactly a Regency romance is, why people can't seem to stop making them, and our own experiences watching them.
If you also love Regency romances, or just want to tell us how much you missed us, let us know on Twitter and Instagram at SexLoveLit.
And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of your other favorite podcast platforms.
And remember to tune in to part 2 of our discussion, coming soon.
On with the show.
Well, hello there, listeners. Welcome back to Sex, Love, Literature. Thank you so much for your patience while we've been on our hiatus.
Yeah, something important happened while we were on hiatus. Ayani became Dr. Cooper.
Oh, that's right. I did a thing. Yes. So I am now Dr. Cooper, which is weird. You all do not have to call me that. I'm still just Ayani to you all, of course. But yeah, so it was a lot of dissertationing and defending and graduating that was happening. And Chloe just opened the door to the room and came back in. So I'm going to close that in a second. The door just opened and I was like, who is there? Of course, it is my cat. So I'll get that in a second. But Chloe is also very excited that we're back. And still kind of in a whirlwind of life right now, getting ready to pack up and move and a whole bunch of other things. But yeah, thank you for your patience while I had to live a lot of life. But now we're back. We're gonna do some sex love literaturing, which is exciting for us. Corinne's making faces at me. Is this not exciting for you, Corinne?
Oh, it's very exciting. Something else that is exciting is that we have 2 guests. Welcome, Mav and Hannah.
So Mav and Hannah are our buddies from Vox Populorum podcast. We've been on their show a couple times, and this is their first time on ours. So, Mav, Hannah, why don't you tell the people, who are you? Why are you here? Beyond the fact that we invited you and we like you.
I'm wondering when the last time we ever said the full name of our podcast out loud was. Like the Vox Populorum podcast. And I'm like, oh yeah, the show is called that.
For me, it was never. It's been never. I've never said it. So what is our podcast, Mav?
Oh god, you mean to do the?
But also, who are you?
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Well, I was trying to avoid that.
I can do it in game show host voice like I do on the show. It's like, I can't actually do it unless I do the hello part, which is weird because I've got it memorized. So I can't just say what it is. And I was like, I have to be like, hello and welcome back to Vox Podcast, the weekly pseudo-accurate roundtable pop culture analysis with drinking and swearing, which is what our show is. It is a pop culture roundtable of mostly academics, not quite. It varies, and every week we have some pop cultural topic, which can vary greatly. From it could be comic books, it could be American Girl dolls, it could be climate change. So it was this week. So this week's show was climate change. It could be the Fast and the Furious movies. It could literally be anything, and we talk about the cultural relevance of something for about an hour while I have a beer. That's what we do. And you guys have both been on. Have you only been on once together?
Once together, I think a couple of times not together.
Yeah. I have very little. We were talking off air. I have very little memory of our shows after we've done them. So as far as I know, you've each been on a dozen times. Because we talk to you all the time. Yeah, we talk to you guys a lot. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Me too. And I guess the thing I should say that I'm nervous to say is that I originally did a PhD in 19th century literature, but now I've I've expanded my career horizons beyond academia, so it's not what I do every day anymore. That makes it sound so much more like mysterious.
It does. I'm like, oh, she's a spy. That's the answer. Expanding the horizons.
I was gonna go with she's Batman, so
Oh, there you go. There's overlap somewhat. Mav, you gave us the whole spiel about VoxPop, but who are you?
Who am I? My name's Christopher Maverick. But you can call me Mav. I am a lot of things. I guess it's weird because I don't know how long your tape delay is, and I'm really bad at podcast time travel in general. So depending on when this episode comes out, I'm either a bum waiting for the summer to be over, or I am a lecturer of literature and cultural studies at University of Pittsburgh, where specifically digital narrative and interactive design.
That's such a cool title.
It is. It's like really, it's a lot of stuff, but I haven't actually started that job as we record, other than the fact that I'm writing a syllabus. Really, I am. I'm totally on that any day now. And for the classes that I'm teaching, but I teach a lot of stuff about cultural studies, and specifically now I'm supposed to be doing stuff about like how you do humanities research on the internet, which I'm weirdly uniquely qualified for. And then I'm just a weird person who I used to write comics. I was a professional wrestler for a while, and I have a show. That's what I do.
That's like a lot of things. Yeah. You're like, oh yes, I've lived my life in 5 disparate industries, but you know, it's nothing.
Yeah, I was a software designer. I've had a lot of jobs. It's very much I made the Batman joke. It's very much a thing where I have like, oh, that seems like a cool idea. Why don't I go to school for 8 years and learn how to do that? And I've done that, a few times. And sometimes it's learning to do cultural studies. Sometimes it's literally learning pro wrestling. There's a lot of overlap. I've written papers about it. So that's what I do. It is. It's a lot of overlap. Roland Barthes wrote a paper, and he's like was way smarter than I am. So
I'm not going to downplay your intelligence. You were a pro wrestler, and I think that's like one of the coolest things in the world. I will not go down that road right now. But Andrew and I are big wrestling fans.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We love wrestling.
They've even gotten me to watch wrestling.
So really super quick aside. During the pandemic, we got Corinne to watch Up, Up, Down, Down, which is for those listening who don't know, is an online kind of gaming channel through YouTube that was started by the wrestler Xavier Woods, and he brings a whole bunch of other wrestlers on. And Adam Cole, and now I'm thinking of their names, Swiss, who is not Cesaro anymore because he's moved to AEW.
Claudio Castagnoli.
Yes, Claudio.
That was his name when I met him originally. He's back. Yes, actually, no, Claudio.
Well, again, we are going to have to talk after the show. And then Tyler Breeze, they were playing Uno together. And then Andrew, Corinne, and I got very invested in watching them play Uno together during the pandemic. We even got shirts from the show that say "Departy" because that was like one of the things that got us through the pandemic. So now Corinne knows these 4 wrestlers. So anytime they're on, I'm like, look, Corinne is Swiss. And she actually saw his AEW debut. So like it's the one person that she would have been excited to watch wrestling for. So it was like perfection.
All right, well, thanks so much for being here, Mav and Hannah. This is so exciting. So on today's episode, we are talking about all things Regency romance. So we originally planned this episode many months ago when the second season of Bridgerton dropped. And that is about when we invited them to come on, and life happened. But we're instead recording this in August. It'll probably drop in September, right after the Netflix Persuasion adaptation dropped. So we thought we would talk about what is it that we like so much about Regency romance? What is it that makes us keep coming back to that as a sort of genre? But before we do that, like we do every episode, we're going to talk very briefly about what's sparking joy for us. So Ayani, what is the What's Sparking Joy segment?
Oh, well, I'm glad you asked. What's Sparking Joy is a small moment that we take to talk about other media, music, video games, television shows, movies that are bringing joy to us in our day-to-day lives, especially because so many of our episodes are focused on a specific topic. This is a nice way to just bring parts of our life into the podcast. So let's start with our guests. Mav, what's sparking joy for you?
It's a lot of pressure when you go first. I picked two things because that seemed to be the pattern from the show. First thing I started watching just this week, we watched because the internet streaming allows us to do this. We watched the first 3 episodes of Claim to Fame, which is now my new favorite reality show. It is hosted by Kevin and Frankie Jonas. Kevin Jonas of the Jonas Brothers, and Frankie Jonas, their other brother that no one knows. And yeah, there's a 4th Jonas brother who doesn't get to be in the band. It's weird. Yes, he sings. He's an actor, but yeah, no, seriously, I'm not. This is not the joke yet. That's all absolutely true. They've got another brother, a younger brother who. I don't know how real it is, but on the show, he clearly has a complex about it, about Jesus. Not, and so there's this show that they're hosting, which is a reality show called Claim to Fame. And the whole gimmick is they've got like 20 people who are related to celebrities, but not.
Yes.
Yeah. And then they go, and then like they're all living in a house and, Big Brother Survivor style, they're living in the same house. And then they have to like sort of, figure out who each other are, and if they can figure out if the other people in the house can figure out who you are, then you get kicked out the house basically, and like whoever is left wins $100,000. So there's been 3 episodes, and some of them we the audience know because they've either told us or one of them, there was one spoilers for a show that as it's like 7 weeks old as you guys listen to it at home, but I knew one. I was so proud of myself from the very first episode, because there was one person who was just calling himself X, and he was like, I'm related to a famous actress, and I'm like, oh my god, it's Laverne Cox's brother. And I know this because I'm a huge Orange is the New Black fan, and on Orange is the New Black they did episodes where there were flashbacks to Sophia was Laverne Cox's characters. There were flashbacks to before she transitioned, and since the actress Laverne Cox very much looks female now, to play the character of Sophia back when she was a man, they hired her real life twin brother Lamar.
And I remember those episodes.
I'm like, I know who you are. And Steph, my wife, is like, how do you know who he is? I'm like, no, I know exactly who you are. And it's Laverne Cox's brother, and I recognize him. And then once you realize it, you can easily hear in his voice that they're the same person, and you can close your eyes and you can squint at them, and you're like, they look exactly alike, except for he's got like a beard and stuff. And I'm like, that's who you are. So we're watching that and enjoying it. And there's only been like 3 episodes. And then the other thing is I'm a big fan of Riverdale, which is the greatest show in the history of television. And it is and Hannah is like groaning because I say this on our show all the time. Riverdale, as we record, just had its season finale 2 nights ago. And they fought a comet and they won. And I was like, yes. Next year we're doing time travel. Like that's how the season ended. We're doing time travel back to like the 1950s next season. And they're in high school again because they all grew up, but they're time traveling back and doing Archie old style after having been superheroes this season, and the show's crazy. It's absolutely insane. I love it. I love it so much.
So I haven't watched Riverdale yet, but I feel like eventually I'm going to have to. But is Riverdale just like live action anime thrown together? Because when you were like they fought a comet, I was like, oh, it's like Gurren Lagann. Is that just what's happening?
It was a slightly, on the first season, it was a slightly weird kind of a Twin Peaks ripoff, but starring Archie characters, where it was like a little surreal, but like very, very grounded. It was just sort of, it was like Archie, but edgy, like that was and it was just like, this is Archie, but now they have sex. And that was like the whole show. And then as the seasons went on, it just got weirder and weirder. And this season they had superpowers, and don't worry about it. Don't try to think about it. Ghosts are real. They've got superpowers. Magic is real. Sometimes you fight a comet. Sometimes you go to a parallel dimension. Remember when
sometimes there's a rocket?
Yeah.
And a cult.
Yeah, there's a rocket.
And serial killers.
And the show just doesn't care. And it's amazing. I love it. I'm not joking. I love it so much. I've seen every episode. And again, Hannah's like just snarling at me.
I am not
and
snarling at you. I just
but like you get to do yours next, and like you're gonna sound just as dumb as I do. 'Cause I know
That's the joy of what's sparking joy, though, is that you can completely go like fandom ape shit for whatever property that you're talking about.
I don't disagree with you, except that you've had the same joke for like 5 years
It's
now.
not a joke. I love it. I love it so much. I really do. I really love this show.
Oh no, I believe you
I'm
love
gonna-
it. I just don't believe
I'm
you
gonna miss it so much when
actually.
it's gone.
I don't believe you think it's actually the best show on television.
They fought a comet, and they won. How can you? How can you not love that?
You're right. I'm sorry. I take it all back. I was wrong.
I feel like you're trying to downplay this, Hannah, because you have to go next. And like, how can you follow up fighting a comet? I don't know.
With the things that lost to the comet, I guess, because I want to talk about dinosaurs.
All right, what's sparking joy for you, Hannah?
So this summer, I was like, you know what? I'm going to reread Jurassic Park because this is where our world is right now. And you know what? It's more relevant than it was in like 1990, which I wasn't even born yet. Barely, but
Oh,
I
God.
was born.
That was a rude thing for you to
Yeah,
say.
I know that was
out
really mean. I just want to say.
I was born in 91. It's not like I, missed it by too much. But I'm sorry. I apologize for not being born sooner. Also to myself, because I think I would have really done well in the 80s. But that's not the point. So Jurassic Park is amazing. It's actually quite different from the movie, and they're both good in their own separate ways. And I'm going to just say it so Mav can feel good about himself. I recommend Jurassic World Dominion because it's the movie that encapsulates our time in 2022 and is the blockbuster we deserve. So I'm going to say it now. 10 out of 10. No notes. So
I have notes. I enjoyed Jurassic Park Dominion. I have many notes. We did a whole episode on it.
I'll drop that in the show
It
notes.
is impossible to give that film notes. The only note is throw it all out and start over. Or 10 out of 10 no notes. Either way. Whichever way you want to go with that. Also, sort of like kind of keeping with the theme of what we're talking about, but not really. Josh and I have been playing board games. Josh is my partner. And the one he's currently super into that I didn't expect him to be, so I've been playing a lot, is called Obsession. And it's set in the Victorian period. And you play a family, and you're trying to like rebuild your reputation and wealth, and convince the Fairchilds that who are like the eligible bachelor and bachelorette of the neighborhood that you are worth like visiting, and that your son or daughter might be worth courting. And so it's quite.
Wait, so you're trying to marry off your kid?
Yeah. And also rebuild your estate and hire servants. And like it's very much like Downton Abbey meets Pride and Prejudice meets like Thomas Hardy. It's fascinating.
Wait, so are you guys partners, or is it like a thing where
so like you the player plays like a family. Like I would play like the Cavendish family, and I'm trying to rebuild my wealth while Josh is playing like the Wessex family.
Mm-hmm. So if the four of us play, like the winner is whoever gets their daughter married off.
No, that certainly helps. But you can win in other ways. Like you can,
daughters don't matter that much.
That's kind of what I was wondering. I was like, is it like? Cause I'm like, is it just like who does he choose?
It's not. So it's more complicated than that. It's like who's successful at courtship. Who is able to successfully build up their estate? Who's successfully able to attract not just any visitors, but reputable like guests into their home, because some guests are rogues and rakes, and they are worth negative points that will bring down your score. Who can?
I want to be a rogue. Can I be a rogue? Can I play a rogue?
I want to be a rake.
Or rake? Yeah. Either
I'm handsome and dangerous.
I'm sure that you can add that element to the game in your in your role play, but that's a little adding. Like you're playing like a whole, like it's interesting because you're playing like a whole family.
Corinne, what is sparking joy for you?
So, two things. The first is a K-drama, surprise, surprise. This one is called Alchemy of Souls. It's on Netflix. It is a alternate world fantasy drama, which are kind of few and far between for K-dramas, I think, because they require a larger budget. But it's a lot of fun. The main character is an assassin who dies basically immediately upon the first episode starting, but manages to put her soul in someone else's body. Shenanigans ensue. There's lots of magic. It's mostly like very goofy, but it's also a Hong Sisters drama for any K-drama fans. So I think as we're recording, I think episode 14 is about to drop. So like we're about to get to a very dramatic part of the story, I have no doubt. So I'm sure the stakes are about to go way up. But it's a lot of fun. There are a lot of really fun actors. Just kind of having a fun, goofy time, at least so far. The other thing that I'm really into right now is a C-drama or Chinese drama, which I don't normally watch because they are very messed up a lot of the time. Like, C-dramas have a lot going on. But this one is called Love Like the Galaxy. It is a historical. And the main character, her name is Niao Niao. And she is like a strategic genius who was neglected as a child. So when she's brought into society, she has no idea how to behave. But like gets mad at people when they like make fun of her. So the two things she's done so far that have absolutely won me over is one, she like picked a fight with people for trying to drown her cousin, but then fully punched herself in the face so that she could look more pathetic and not get in trouble. And the second thing was engineering the collapse of a bridge with all of her enemies on it so that they would be embarrassed in front of the men they were trying to court. So I'm absolutely here for it. It is hilarious. 10 out of 10, highly recommend.
Historical to what era? When does this take place?
I think around... Oh, I have no idea. I'm much better at Korean history than Chinese history. I think it's set around like the year 1000-ish, so like 1,000 years ago. So it's like historical-ish.
Okay. I mean, you could have easily, like, you were describing them, like, is this like historical, like 1900? 1800? Okay, so it's way back.
Yeah, there's like generals and lots of battles being fought. And Niao Niao also comes from a military family. So she also has like the weight of that. Anyway, I have fallen down the C-drama rabbit hole. Also, the thing about C-dramas, really quickly, is that K-dramas are lovely and that they're generally capped around 16 or like max 20 episodes. This C-drama that I'm watching is 52 episodes.
Oh.
All like an hour long. So like it is a commitment that I have now made. But...
How many episodes have you watched?
14 in like 3 days. So I
wasn't trying to shout you out with how fast you did it. I just wanted to know how fast.
Yeah, it's the summer. I gotta get them in while the summer is still happening before the fall starts. So
okay,
I get that.
Anyway, Ayani, what's sparking joy for you?
I mean, everyone on this call, apparently, so I'm just cracking up. But, so I got, because Corinne is terrible and forces me to watch things, I have 2 K-dramas that are sparking joy for me. The first is Extraordinary Attorney Woo, which has been wonderful. I've literally cried every episode. What is really super quick synopsis? Attorney Woo is the first person to have passed the bar in South Korea in this fantasy conception of modern South Korea that is autistic or that has autism. So it's kind of about her navigating her life at a law firm, arguing cases, falling in love, all that kind of stuff. It's delightful. I like it a lot. I was doing a little reading the other day because I was trying to figure out what she actually says in that line where she like says all of their palindromes, right? Like kayak, tomato.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera.
Her name is Woo Young Woo, so her name is a palindrome.
Right.
So every time she introduces herself, she like gives a list of palindromes. But the way Netflix does anyway, this is a rabbit hole. But the way Netflix does subs is they like came up with English equivalents rather than giving us the Korean. But you looked it up,
except
Ayani?
for tomato. Yeah, no, that's perfect. Because tomato, I had to catch. I was like, tomato's not a palindrome, and I'm like, but if it's transliterated into Hangul, then it is to, and then that would be a palindrome. Because it would be the to symbol, the ma symbol, and the to symbol, right? Or symbol character. But anyhow, I was doing some reading about it, and I know there are some mixed feelings out there on the internet about Attorney Woo and about the show, but I do find it extremely delightful. I think a lot of what they're doing is very, very smart. And I think they are talking about complicated topics deftly and with care and with attention. Also, all the actors are really cute and it makes me cry. So I like it. The second thing that's sparking joy for me is, well, I can't blame Corinne for this one. This one's actually my fault, but it's a K-drama called Yumi's Cells, which I think we might have talked about before, perhaps. It's based on a webtoon that I absolutely love, and this was the second season. And I have a lot of feelings about this season that I will not share because I do not want to spoil things for anyone who is watching. But it's a really good show. It's high emotion. It's really funny. And also it gives you interesting ways to think about how your brain works. Because what the premise is that you get Yumi's outside life and it's kind of slice of life and it's about her story and the men that she's dating and all that kind of stuff. But also a lot of the show is spent with her quote unquote cells, which are these little personifications of different parts of her personality. So you have sensitivity.
So it's like Inside Out, but for adults.
Right.
Yes,
And with more
Rationality.
variation.
Right, exactly. It's not just like anger, joy, etc. It's more kind of spaced out. Like there's cleanliness cell, but there's also like self-care sale and all that kind of stuff. And it's really changed kind of like how I think about myself and how I think about my life. Like who's your prime cell, which is one of our favorite things to kind of talk about right now. So those are the two things that are sparking a lot of joy for me. But without further ado, because we sparked a lot of joy here, I want to kind of scooch us along into our discussion proper, thinking about Regency romances. So, to start, I think it might be helpful to give a little information about what a Regency romance is. If you are like me, you might kind of have a general idea, but not necessarily the deep, abiding love that some people have for these kinds of stories. So, Corinne, since you are kind of one of our guides through Regency romance for this episode, how would you describe what a Regency romance is?
So the sort of generally accepted definition that I found that I do not necessarily fully abide by, but it's basically a period romance, or so a historical romance set in Britain in the 1800s. There are a couple caveats to that definition. The Regency period was apparently only from 1811 to 1820, but the term is often used to cover basically the whole century. And I also want to note that when we say Regency romance, if we talk about romance as defined by the Romance Writers of America, that means it has to have a happily ever after at the end. So that would be like capital R romance. We're more sort of using like lowercase r romance, or what our fellow podcasters over at Afternoon of Delight, who are romance writers, would call a love story. So Regency romance, it's a huge genre within like romance fiction, but it kind of has, I think, gone on to be used more expansively, and we'll be using a more expansive definition here in our conversation.
Yeah. And also to plug VoxPop, since y'all are here, I think the last time I was on the show, we did an episode about romance and romance fiction. So that would be a good one for us to throw in the show notes in relation to this conversation. So with that definition in place, what are y'all's relationships to Regency romance? So like for me, for example, I have obviously read Pride and Prejudice, right? I'm a literature scholar, so I've had to read some Austen, but it was not, or I should say is not, let's do present tense, my kind of like genre of choice. It's not the thing I run to. Like one of my cousins and my aunt, they're like very, very big Jane Austen people, and that's not necessarily my bag. So Corinne and I, over the last couple of months of kind of prepping for this episode, have been doing kind of like a Regency romance crash course. So I watched the Pride and Prejudice 2005 film. We watched, I was going to say Swayed and Persuasion. That's not the name of it. Sense and Sensibility. We watched Sense and Sensibility, which was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. We watched Persuasion, the new one from Netflix, which we will come back to. And of course, I've watched Bridgerton because that was kind of the initial context for this show. But a lot of it is very, very new to me. It's not like a genre that I've sat with. So throwing this to y'all, what are kind of your your relationships with Regency romance?
Mine's basically exactly the same. I am a literature scholar, so I had to read Pride and Prejudice at some point. I mean, like, it's a rule. Like, that's
how it goes.
Someone makes you do that in your intro to the novel class, and I did, and it was fine. And I've read other stuff here and there. Definitely not my genre or my time period or even my country, because I guess technically it's supposed to be, British novels, whereas I tend to read American ones. Though that's questionable. But interesting enough, and I didn't really know what the real definition was up until you guys asked me to do the show, and I read Wikipedia. And it was the same. I mean, it was the same thing. It was the same thing. I was just like, Regency, romance books in the 1800s, I guess. Like, that was basically my knowledge of it. And then I watched Bridgerton because Hannah made me, and I loved it.
I was gonna say, talk about wrestling interests, like Bridgerton.
Oh, no, I enjoyed it. It's not a complaint. I have no complaints about Bridgerton. I am 100% in. I've read the first Bridgerton book. There's been stuff here and there. But the honest truth is, I watched Bridgerton because when Bridgerton came out, Hannah said, "We're doing a show on this," and I was like, "Okay." So I'll go watch this, and it's like, oh, this is good. I love this. So that's very new for me as well. Like, the last, I guess, 2 years since Bridgerton started. I lose track.
Yeah, what about you, Hannah?
So I won't give you the long story of how I started reading Jane Austen, but I started with Sense and Sensibility in late middle school, early high school. And it was like the first book in a long time that would took me 2 weeks to read. But I was like, I thought it would be super old sounding or something, but it actually sounds a bit modern. Maybe I should read more of these at some point in time. And over the next couple years, I read, and I realized, because I am going to be that one pedantic person this one time, that you're right. The Regency period was very short. It was interesting because, King George was ill, as Bridgerton portrays. And so he wasn't he wasn't deemed fit to rule. And that's where the Regency title comes from, because the king was not dead, but his son wasn't officially taking over. Also, his son was not super popular. But that's not the most interesting thing about what's happening here. So I read, a bunch of other 19th century novels like Jane Eyre, Pride and Prejudice, of course. The 2005 version came out, and I actually think I saw it before I read the book. And it just sort of spiraled from there. And then I started studying the 19th century in college and grad school. And at one point while writing my dissertation, I sort of had a breakdown. It was I can't do this anymore. So what I did was I stopped writing my chapter on Jane Eyre and started reading a bunch of only Regency, nothing Victorian, because I couldn't stand the Victorian period. So I was I still like you, Austen. So I'll read novels set in 1800 and stop at 1820. I think Bridgerton stops in the a little past the technical Regency period in the later 1820s. This is the only time period. This is what I'm doing. No Queen Victoria. I'm done. So I read everything from Georgette Heyer, which I want to mention. She is deemed a Regency classic, but I shouldn't mention her without saying even though she's recommended to a lot of people, more recently there's been more discussion from people like Courtney Milan, who's a Regency writer, and Bianca Hernandez Knight about her complicated writings and how a lot of her books have been abridged to get rid of the anti-Semitism and racism that are inherent in them. And then I've read more modern stuff like Courtney Milan, who is one of the writers not only working to bring more diverse stories to the Regency period and the 19th century as a whole, but to make romance writing more inclusive. So I've read too much romance, and too much Regency romance specifically is what I'm telling you.
And we'll definitely come back to some of those things you're talking about later, because as a newbie, I have some questions, right, about what the rules, quote unquote, are. So Corinne, as my Regency romance teacher, tutor, scholar, professor person, what is your history with, or your history? Yeah, that's the word we're using, right? What's your history with Regency romance?
Yeah, so mine starts out pretty similar to Hannah's, actually. I think I was remembering as she was talking that I read Pride and Prejudice in 6th grade, largely to say that I read Pride and Prejudice. But from there, I remember... and from there, I remember seeing the 2005 Pride and Prejudice in theaters and was like, oh, I like this. I would like to see more of it, probably. And then since then, I've like seen almost every Jane Austen adaptation, probably. Like when Bridgerton came out, I was like, yeah, I should watch that. But unlike Hannah, my interest has largely remained non-professional. So I specialize in contemporary children's literature. So little to no overlap with the Victorian period or the Regency period or the long 19th century. But I remain a very avid casual fan, which I think has allowed me to enjoy the Victorian period in a way that Hannah does not or did not briefly. But I've also read some of Courtney Milan's stuff. It's really, really excellent. It still remains in like that area where it's like I can read this and it probably will not become my work. So it can still be for fun. But I really enjoy it, but also at the same time see some of the problems that I'm sure we'll talk about, like with diversity, colonialism, a very myopic view of what success is, and also the problems with romanticizing that.
Oof. All right. Well, jumping off of those serious talking points that Corinne has left us with.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So people love Regency romance, right? This is a genre that people keep coming back to get something out of. But kind of one of the questions that we have is like, how does Regency romance work? Why do people want it so bad? Why do we keep telling these stories? Why do we keep coming back to them? So Mav, of course, jump in whenever you want. But since Corinne and Hannah, you two are like the ones that have had like the big fandom moments with this, would it be fair to call it a genre? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think we can call it a genre, especially at least for our conversation.
Yeah, for our conversation.
What it is.
Yeah. So for our conversation, like what are the things about Regency romance that make people keep coming back to it in y'all's opinion?
So I think the answer for me, and this is not something that only exists in Regency romances, but for me it is, I think, a very sort of tangible yearning, because there are a lot of strict rules in these like romantic story, like you can't touch each other, like except when you're dancing. You can only call on each other at certain times. You can only see each other like with a chaperone. So like there is a sort of yearning for something that may never happen, that like it's just a particular set of circumstances in which yearning is pretty easy to manufacture. And I appreciate a good love story with like a lot of yearning before anything actually happens.
That's
what about you, Hannah?
Tropes.
I since we're talking 2005 Pride and Prejudice, and you brought up yearning, I can't help but mention the hand scene where Darcy.
Oh yeah, like, iconic.
Yeah, like he helps her into the carriage, and then like there's like close-ups of his hand, and you're just like, oh, what? Like
I've seen this movie like 3 times.
He helped her into the carriage. It's the first time they've ever touched.
Yeah, like Josh and I cannot watch the movie, and we watch it in actually Emma 2020 fairly regularly because he's a huge fan of Austen. He's actually rereading. He should have been on this instead of me because he's rereading, not rewriting. That'd be a different thing. He's rereading Pride and Prejudice right now, and he's like, I forgot how funny this is. Do you want me to tell you about the Mr. Collins scenes? Do you want me to read some out loud? Because it's just so good.
That's like a very Mr. Collins move.
Yeah, right? I'm going to read these scenes to you out loud.
Because, they're just so deeply funny. Which I don't want to compare him to Mr. Collins, but actually what's funny is Mr. Collins is like, hey, it would be fun if what we did after dinner, if I read aloud to you from like these really pedantic sermons. Very different vibe than Austen. She's making fun of them, but
oh, we had a face in the background.
Oh, I think he heard his name and thought I was calling him, and now he's probably like, "Why are you talking about me reading Pride and Prejudice?" Anyway, so yeah, of course, like yearning makes sense. I also think that like while our social protocols in 2022 might not be exactly the same as like 1812, like you can turn a guy down for a dance and still be able to dance with other guys if you're like out for a night, right? Like that was like a thing. Like for politeness, you had to like accept every dance. That's why Elizabeth is like, darn it, I have to dance with Collins. Ugh. And she had to. So like while things are different, there certainly are like enough overlaps about, you know, following like the expectations of society, or like, you know, I grew up in southern Mississippi, and my sister and I both went to colleges in southern Mississippi, and there was a saying that was ring by spring. For those of you who have not heard of ring by spring, the idea is that you need to get engaged by the spring of your senior year, or you'll be alone forever because your life's clearly over at the age of 22.
Oh, Jesus Lord.
So my sister literally, like, when she was like in her English classes, was comparing Austen to this like concept of ring by spring and like the scarcity of men. There is a modern day adaptation novel of Jane Austen called Unmarriageable, and the author reading it was like, hey, Jane Austen must is like understands like Pakistani culture. Like Sonia Kamal, the author of Unmarriageable, was like, I see my culture somewhat in Austen, like this translates really well for me, and like wrote a really good adaptation of Austen in like 2000, early like 2000s Pakistan, and it's really interesting. And so like I think that there's a lot of like different ways you can relate to Austen even in the current time, especially if you know you're a woman, or you know, and limited by society, and there's, you know, all sorts of things that still relate today, even if they're slightly different. Like I forgot what I was saying, but that's fine. I think that there was a point in there. But but like, you know, there's all sorts of like things in Austen that still translate today, whether it's like class or the importance of manners, the questions of like judgment and taste, the question of gossip. I think something particularly strong in Regency romance that we don't talk enough about is actually the relationships between women. Because like I will always give a shout out to Sharon Marcus, who wrote a book of criticism called Between Women, and it still vividly sticks in my mind her like point that like in Austen novels, a major way people find the person they're going to marry is because they have strong relationships with other women, and the relationships between women is how they survive.
Interesting.
I'll get back to that when we talk about Persuasion, because it's interesting what they've done in the new version and what they've cut out.
So there's a couple of threads I want to pull on from what Hannah was talking about, like in particular, how Jane Austen is associated so strongly with Regency romance, even when her stuff is adapted to other settings, other places, other time periods. It still has almost, we look for the ways it resonates with Regency romance. But before we talk about that, I kind of wonder, Mav and Ayani, as people who never really got bit by the Jane Austen or Regency romance bug, from the outside, what does it look like the appeal of it is, and why was it not appealing to you before?
Oh, that's a good question. Mav, you want to go first?
I think the appeal is the clothes, caveat. This is Ayani made fun of me at the beginning for having way too many jobs. I was a photographer for a while. Yes.
Yes, I was and another one. You're like DJ Khaled over here.
I guess I could just shout my name a lot like Khaled. I'm not a fan. I'm sure he's wonderful. But I did a lot of glamour photography, and there's a subgroup of people who are just super into glamorous period Victorian and Regency clothing and Lolita clothing, which is mostly sort of inspired by the idea of how Lolita looked in various versions of the Nabokov adaptation for film, which is not exactly 18th century, 19th century clothing. It's very weird, but it's totally a thing that people like cosplaying and stuff. And I think to me, that's where it becomes interesting. I've done a couple of photo shoots. And by I've done photo shoots, I was the photographer because I don't look great in dresses. But I've done a couple of photo shoots of this, and I think that it seems silly because people go, well, how could you be into this ridiculous thing said by people who, dress up as superheroes or who wear the jerseys of their favorite football or hockey teams or whatever. Like, so I think it's a fandom that just has a lot of fantasy in it because of its acceptable otherness, right? Like, you can be weird and distinct, and you can totally nerd out over something that is not the now, but like, because it's British and old fashioned, it's sophisticated, right? Like, you can pretend we're being fancy, and we're not nerds, we're fancy people who, wear petticoats, I guess. I don't know. But you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I think that's part of it, right? Yeah.
I like a good petticoat.
Again, I have several. They just don't fit me. I was a photographer. I actually have I can see my model clothes in that closet right over there that I'm looking at. Like, there's a whole closet full of stuff for people to try on. But yes, I think that's a big part of it. And this is part of the fantasy. I think that, in the same way as dressing up like Captain Marvel or Iron Man would be, right?
This isn't about clothes, Mav. But speaking of the time fantasy and just fantasy in general, I think one thing that someone said a while ago, and I don't know who it was, so I am sorry, but it stuck with me. Like, they were talking about romance, 50 Shades, everything from Pride and Prejudice to Jane Eyre to 50 Shades of Grey. And they said part of the fantasy is that people, generally people are struggling with money and stability, and the world feels like they're falling apart around them. And part of the fantasy of romance, but also the structure of what we see in Austen of what they termed the kind of jerky billionaire. He becomes tamed and he marries you, and then you're taken care of, and that actually made 50 Shades of Grey make a lot more sense for me, because I was the writing in this. Everyone knows, if you listen to VoxPop podcast, how obsessed I am with 50 Shades of Grey, despite making fun of it all the time. It's the novel I'll never be able to finish reading because it's 500 pages and it's really bad. But also I'm fascinated by it as a cultural artifact. But I think it makes sense. She's given a job as an editor straight out of college at the age of 22, and she's never going to have to be a starving grad student trying to get her PhD. And and when I was a starving grad student trying to get my PhD, I was oh yeah, I didn't think I would have these thoughts to myself, but wouldn't it be nice if someone really rich married me and I had job security?
I will say, and if he ever listens to it, I've met your boyfriend. He is much nicer than Christian Grey is.
Oh, please don't make that comparison.
I'm saying he's way better.
I know you're saying he's nice.
Way better. You said you had that. You chose better, much better. I like Josh.
I regret everything about what I've said today.
It's too late now. We've captured it. It's on record.
Oh no.
But I mean, I just kind of vibing with what you're saying. I think a lot of, from the outside, what it seems like is this kind of fantasy of a particular kind of romance, right? In our modern day conceptions of romance from a Western American context, right? Because every place is different. The thought of there being lingering in a hand touch, and that's all you're going to get, for the next 6 or 7 months. That's not most people's conception of how real life romance unfolds. So I think with these Regency romances, it kind of feels like there's that sense of remove that allows for a certain kind of fantasy of romance to unfold, which is not a bad thing. I mean, I love a good romance story. I love some good yearning, but and this is something I kind of want to come back to too, is what happens when we remove the yearning from the equation? Does it change what a Regency romance is? But we can come back to that a little later. But that's kind of what it feels like to me. But also I think, Mav, you're on.
I just said this Bridget and
the apparel, because
oh yeah.
Yeah, the aesthetics of it are special and top tier. And I because going through my crash course, I was asking Corinne, I was like, why aren't they dressed up at this ball? And Corinne was like, oh, this is just a country ball. You're going to get the fancy ball later. And then I was like, oh, look at these feathers. Yes, this is the fancy ball. So like there is kind of like the aesthetic juju quality of like being a fancy Regency lady with your bosoms all propped up in your dress and what have you. So yeah, that's my outside take is bosoms. So I think I will end it there. And pause. So we ended up having so much fun with Mav and Hannah that our one episode ended up kind of being a bit longer than we expected.
So we decided to make 2.
Which we have often done. Like, we keep doing this. We should know better, but here we are. So we're going to end part 1, episode 1 here. And you'll have a part 2 to look forward to that kind of continues to round out our conversation.
And in the meantime, if you'd like to hear more of Mav and Hannah, you can always find them over at VoxPopcast. And if you'd like to bother us or bother Ayani to edit faster, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and occasionally Facebook at SexLoveLit.
Until next time, y'all. Bye.
Bye.